Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay with University City Public Library, and on behalf of the library, we would like to welcome you all to this very special evening with Tony Messenger. Before we really get rolling, I just want to make sure everybody keeps their microphones muted during the meeting here tonight. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat and we will address those as at the end of the presentation. And let's see. I think that is about all. Oh, and we are live streaming to YouTube and Facebook. So if you do want to revisit this presentation, feel free to check out the University City Public Library page. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Tony Messenger. Tony is a Metro columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. He has won many awards. Among those are a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2015 for his reporting on Ferguson. And then in 2019, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the debtors' prisons in Missouri. There is his very first book was just published this past December by St. Martin's Press, Profit and Punishment, How America Criminalizes the Poor in the Name of Justice. That, of course, is available through the library, but you can also pick up a special copy through Subterranean Books here in the Del Mar Loop. They are going to have signed copies, so you can go ahead and get yours ordered today. I will be putting the link to that in the chat. And I believe that covers about all of the basics. So please join me in welcoming Tony. Tony, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Lindsay. I'll be getting by Subterranean to sign those books in the next day or two. I would have had them already signed, but as Lindsay knows, I had a positive COVID test last week. So I've been stuck here at my home. Some of you, unfortunately, have probably had to deal with that reality as we all go through the pandemic together. So because of that pandemic, here we are. I'm getting very used to giving these sorts of presentations on Zoom. I wish we could be live. I wish we could all do this together, and maybe sometime in the next year or two, we'll be able to talk about my book again and do so at the library. But again, thank you all for being here. When lots of young journalists have this dream of winning the Pulitzer someday. I know when I was a young journalist, I'm not a young journalist anymore, but when I was, I think a lot of us all think, oh boy, someday I'm going to win the Pulitzer. I'm going to do this great magical, piece of journalism, jujitsu, and win the top prize in journalism. And then after I win it, I'm going to go around the nation giving all of these wonderful talks about what I did, how I pulled it off. And maybe I'll write a book. Lots of that stuff happened to me after I won the Pulitzer in 2019. And of course, it did lead to this book, Profit and Punishment, that I'm very proud of, that really takes the national look at our problem in this nation with fines and fees and with debtors' prisons. But the reality of most of the talks that I've given since I won the Pulitzer is they focus on one of the most important things that happened to me as I was reporting on both the columns that hopefully some of you read in the Post-Dispatch that led to the Pulitzer, and then the very basics that make up my book. And that is a mistake that I made early in the reporting process. It involves one of the main characters of my book, a woman named Brooke Bergen. Brooke is a woman who lived in Southwest Missouri in Dent County, lived in Salem, and she stole an $8 tube of mascara from Walmart. Brooke ended up doing a year in the county jail for stealing that tube of mascara, which many of you, I think, will realize, gosh, that sounds like an awful long time in jail for stealing a tube of mascara. And then she ended up owing the county $15,000 in a bill for her time in jail. This is how I came to know about Brooke's story. In late 2017 and early 2018, a variety of lawyers and others had alerted me to this concept that exists in Missouri, that I have since learned out since I wrote the book, that exists all over the country, that people actually get charged for their time in jail. It doesn't happen very much in the St. Louis region. There's lots of places that don't charge for time in jail because we have the tax base to pay for our jails. But a lot of people all over the country get charged for their time in jail. And what I found was happening in Missouri, particularly in rural Missouri, is that poor people were getting this bill for their time in jail. They were unable to pay this bill, and then they ended up back in jail primarily because of the fact that they couldn't pay that bill. They were in jail because they were poor. These were modern day debtors' prisons. And as I started reporting on this and learning about this, I asked some public defenders that I know, I said, send me the worst cases. Send me the cases of people that owed lots and lots of money that they were never going to be able to pay for minor offenses. I want to write about those cases. And they sent me some names. And one of the names that I got early on was this woman named Brooke Bergen, who stole the $8 tube of mascara. And a lawyer sent me the court documents. And the court documents told what, to me, I thought was a story about math. She stole an $8 tube of mascara. She ended up owing $15,000 on that tube of mascara. And even after serving a year in jail, she was still having to show up before the judge month after month and explain whether or not she had 50 bucks or 100 bucks or whatever she could pay to pay down that bill. It just didn't seem very just. And it seemed to me early on in my reporting on this process like a math problem that everybody was going to get. Everybody was going to understand this, and it was going to really highlight the problem I was trying to bring to the attention of Missouri lawmakers and readers of the Post-Dispatch and everybody else. And it worked. When I first wrote about Brooke's story, people were horrified because they saw the injustice in somebody who owed this $15,000 bill and still was having to go to court even after serving a year in jail. But as I explained at the beginning of this talk, I made a mistake in that story. And the mistake was this: I had all of these court documents related to Brooke's case. I had an old phone number for Brooke. I tried to call her, didn't get in touch with her, but I had the court documents that could help me tell the story. I didn't do one of the things that all reporters these days know they have to do. I didn't search for Brooke on Facebook. I didn't search for Brooke on Twitter or Instagram or any of the social media places. That's where we find people today. That's where most reporters actually track people down. We used to have driver's records that we looked through. We used to have these old city directories where you could track people by phone numbers and address and all that sort of thing. Now we find people on social media. And I didn't do that because I had the court documents and I thought I had the story. I thought I knew what the story was. So that column publishes in early 2018. And the next day I get a Facebook message, and it's from Brooke Bergen. Brooke Bergen saw my story and she found me, and she sends me a Facebook message and she said, "Mr. Messenger, I saw this story about my case. And I'm not upset about it. I'm glad somebody cares about my case. I think it's a good story. I appreciate you bringing it to light. I just wonder why you didn't, talk to me beforehand." And she was right. And I was horrified. As an experienced journalist who's been doing this for a long time, I just thought, wow, I really dropped the ball here. I didn't go that extra step to make sure that I knew more about Brooke. And I started to talk to Brooke, and Brooke wasn't upset at me. And she started to tell me about her life. And she started explaining to me the other women like her, most of them poor single women who were in the Dent County Jail, who suffered through the same sorts of problems in the jail that she did. And I realized that this was not a math story. This was a story about the human condition. This was a story about our neighbors who were being abused in the name of justice. This is a story about using the criminal justice system to raise money for other government services, while real people, whether or not they are people who occasionally break the law or have drug addictions or other struggles that they go through in life, real people are suffering at the hands of the criminal justice system and the governments that allow this system to go on. And so I talked to Brooke and agreed to come down and meet her and work more on this story. And that moment, that mistake that I made early on in my reporting on this debtor's prison problem in Missouri, and now with the book in the nation, that mistake changed everything. It changed how I wrote the columns going forward. It became the important nature of how I decided to write this book. So for those of you who haven't picked up a copy yet, the primary narrative in Profit and Punishment talks about 3 different single moms across the country: Brooke Bergen in Missouri, Kendi Kilman in Oklahoma, and Sasha Darby in Columbia, South Carolina. All of them had minor interactions with the criminal justice system, ended up pleading guilty or being found guilty for the charges, all misdemeanors, and then ended up getting this bill for hundreds or $1,000 or more for various costs that the legislature had imposed upon them. And those costs ended up being the real problem that dragged down Kendi's life and Brooke's life and Sasha's life. And because of what I learned when I first talked to Brooke, that's how I decided to approach the book. It's important when we talk about these problems in the criminal justice system that we just don't look at everybody who is involved in the system, everybody who goes to jail, and we just don't quickly say, well, they're criminals. They broke the law, they've got to do their time, whatever happens, happens. That's unfortunately how some people, I think, look at our criminal justice system. It's not how I look at it. And my views have changed over the years because I've spent so much time in the last few years meeting people and their families who are involved in the criminal justice system and realizing how poorly they are treated and how often their civil rights are trampled upon. So how does the system work so that somebody like Brooke ends up owing $15,000 in a jail bill and causing her to be tied to the criminal justice system for years upon years upon years? Well, it works like this. The problem is our entire criminal justice system from beginning to end is tied to the concept of extracting wealth. And unfortunately, because 80% of the people involved in the criminal justice system happen to be poor, and we know that by statistics of who qualifies for a public defender, the system is trying to take money out of poor people that it can't afford to get money out of. But it starts early on. So as I walk through these cases in the book, I try to talk about every step of the way that takes people and criminalizes their poverty. And so it starts with bail. Bail is a hard one for people to understand because sometimes people are accused of bad things and they end up in jail because they can't afford their bail. But they're not actually in jail because they were found guilty. They're not in jail because the system presumes they're guilty. The system is supposed to presume they're innocent. They're in jail because they're poor. In most cases, the people that are held in our jails because of bail are not there because they're allegedly violent criminals. They're there because the system has imposed a cost upon them that they can't afford to buy their freedom. So what happens in a place like Dent County in particular, because it's rural and it's poor and the judges tend to be pretty harsh in terms of the bail that they put out there, somebody like Brooke ends up behind bars and can't afford bail even on a misdemeanor charge. So then they have to wait to meet a public defender. Well, that's the second part of where our system is messed up. We don't fund our public defenders in the same way that we fund our prosecution. And when you think about that, if you use another math equation, you think about the idea of a balanced equation. Prosecutors are on one side, public defenders are on the other side. They're both part of the government system of criminal justice. And yet we skew the system in the United States significantly. And in Missouri in particular, Missouri has one of the least funded public defender systems in the country. Until very recently, it was the second least funded public defender system in the country. The Missouri legislature's increased funding in the last couple of years. I don't know what the new statistics are yet, but it's still not very good. So you're a poor person and you've been arrested with this shoplifting and you're stuck in jail and you can't afford to get out because of bail. Now you're waiting to meet your public defender, but because the public defender system is underfunded, the rich person who was charged with the same thing, or the middle class person charged with the same thing, they never spend a night in jail because they wrote a check. You're in jail away from your kids, you lost your car, it probably got towed. Maybe you still owe rent and you can't get a hold of your landlord. Now you have to wait a week or so to see your public defender. And then the public defender has to wait another week until the judge has court in order to ask to get the bond reduced. Maybe the bond gets reduced, maybe it doesn't. Eventually you're in jail a week or two, or maybe even a month, and the prosecutor comes to you. And this is one of the most insidious parts of the system if you're a poor person. And it happens all over the country. You're stuck in jail because you can't afford bail, and you can barely even get to your public defender who's got so many cases he doesn't have much time for you or her. And all of a sudden, the prosecutor says, you know what? You don't want to be in jail anymore. How about we let you out of jail? You just have to sign on this dotted line. You plead guilty to this offense. It's a misdemeanor. I'll ask the judge for time served. He'll tell you that your sentence is going to be a year, but we'll just say time served. The rest of it will be suspended and you get to go home. Who's not going to take that deal? People like Brooke Bergen take that deal every day of the week. They take it in St. Louis, in U City, in Dent County, in Columbia, South Carolina, where Sasha Darby was from, in Norman, Oklahoma, where Kendi Kellman is from. People take that deal all the time because they're poor and they want to get out of jail. But then they get the bill because legislatures for the past decade in particular, but for as long as we've had a criminal justice system, have decided that the courts are a good place to raise money. Rather than telling their constituents they're raising taxes, they instead just say, hey, let's add a $3 fee onto every speeding ticket. Let's add a $10 fee onto every ticket that's a misdemeanor. Let's add a $15 fee to pay for sheriff's retirement. And all of those fees add up. And so now you're a poor person and you've pleaded guilty, and you find out that you have a $1,000 bill for you pleading guilty. And that $1,000 bill isn't restitution for what you stole. That $1,000 bill doesn't have anything to do with trying to stop you from committing a further crime. That $1,000 bill is all about raising money for state government, for local government, for municipal government, for county government. That's all it is. And you get that bill, and if you're in rural Missouri or in South Carolina or in Oklahoma or in many other states, you get a bill for the time you already served in jail. Because once you plead guilty, that bill kicks in. So now you get another several $100s or $1,000 or whatever it happens to be. And guess what? You're out of jail. You've lost your house. You've lost your car. You've lost your kids. And now you have this bill that you're never going to be able to pay. And what does the system do? The system says, if you can't afford to pay that bill, we're going to put you in jail again. That's what the system does. And that's debtor's prison. That's putting poor people back in jail. That's forcing a two-tiered criminal justice system where people who look like me and have my lived experience and have a relatively comfortable middle-class lifestyle don't face those sorts of consequences. That's one of the reasons that I wrote these columns to begin with and ended up writing this book. After I went to Dent County to meet with Brooke, she introduced me to one of the other women who had served in the Dent County jail with her, a woman named Amy Murr. And Amy and I were having lunch one day. She too had been charged with a couple of misdemeanors, had spent time in the Dent County jail because she couldn't afford to get out, had gotten bills for jail time and couldn't afford to pay them and had been put back in jail because of it. And I wrote about her story, and I wrote about the story of some other folks in similar circumstances. And Amy asked me a question, and I write about this in the book as well. She said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you coming from St. Louis to Dent County to meet with all of us poor people who have been spending time in jail? They don't care about us here. We're just poor people who happen to be, in many cases, battling addiction. That's one of the reasons how a lot of people in rural Missouri end up having problems with the criminal justice system, because they're battling opioid addiction or meth addiction or heroin addiction." And Amy said, "They don't care about us here. Why do you care about us? Why are you coming down here and writing about us?" And so I told Amy a story. I told her a story from when I was a single dad in Colorado many years ago. And I had taken my kid to a soccer game, and he left the soccer game to go spend the night with a friend. And I was on my way home, where my oldest daughter was watching two of my other kids. And all of a sudden, I turn the corner on a particular street and I get pulled over. I see the flashing lights behind me, and I get pulled over. I've been pulled over before. I occasionally speed. And the police officer says to me, she pulls me over and she comes up and, asks for my license and registration and goes through all the, the stuff that happens when you get pulled over. And she says, "Do you know why I'm pulling you over today?" And I said, "No." I said, I don't think I was speeding. I think I signaled when I turned. I don't know why." And she's like, "Your tags are expired. You forgot to, renew your tags." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I forgot to do that. I'm sorry." And she's like, "I'm going to go run your information through the computer, and I'll be back with you shortly." So she goes back to her police car. I'm sitting there all nervous, waiting for whatever to happen. And it's taking the longest amount of time. And I'm looking in the rearview mirror, and she's sitting there and she's looking at the computer and looking at me and looking at the computer. And then all of a sudden I see another police car pulls up behind her. Now there's two police cars, and the other officer gets out and they talk for a little bit, and now they're headed my way. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I figure now there's two cops and they're coming to get me. This is probably not good for me. And so they get to my car and they say, "Mr. Messenger, I need you to get out of the car." I say, "Excuse me?" "Mr. Messenger, you need to get out of the car and put your hands on the back of the trunk." So all of a sudden, first time in my life, I'm getting out of the car and my hands are on the trunk, and I'm getting frisked, and my legs spread apart, and all of a sudden I'm getting handcuffed, and they walk me back to the police car, and a hand on top of the head, and put me into the back seat of the police car. "Mr. Messenger, do you know why we're placing you under arrest today?" And I said, "No." And I'm telling this story to Amy Murr, by the way. And I said, "No, I don't know why I'm being placed under arrest today." And they said, "Well, there's a warrant out for your arrest." And I said, what did I do?" And they said, "Well, we don't know yet. We just know there's a warrant out for your arrest. We've arrested you, and now we're gonna, get some more information." So great. I'm sitting in the back of the police car. There's a warrant out for my arrest. I have no idea what I've done other than I have expired tags. And eventually she explains to me that I've got an old speeding ticket in Morrison. Morrison is this speed trap town west of Denver, where I grew up in Colorado. And it's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that. A couple of years ago, I got a speeding ticket there. I put it in my glove compartment. I forgot about it." Obviously, I forget these things. I'm not suggesting, by the way, for those of you who are younger people, my daughter just got her driving permit today. These are not good things. You should pay your speeding tickets. You should get your tags renewed at the appropriate time. But clearly I was not being the most responsible. And the police officer says, look, we're going to have to take you into the station and, fingerprint you and book you and all of that. Do you have any money to bail out? I said, well, I got $80 in my wallet. It's sitting in my car. You can go grab it if you'd like. And she goes up and grabs my wallet. Yes, there's $80 in there. You hold on to it for now, and we'll do that. So she takes me to the police station. I get fingerprinted. I get booked. I give her $80 and I go home. That's all that happens to me. So I wrote a column this week about a woman named Kylie Font, who's one of the people who sued the city of Ferguson 7 years ago over their municipal court practices. That's not what happened to Kylie Font. If you're poor and you're Black in North St. Louis County, at least before 2014, and you got pulled over for a traffic ticket and you didn't have any more than $80 in your pocket, you were going to jail. And if you're poor and you're white in rural Missouri and you get pulled over in a situation like that or charged with a similar minor crime, you're going to jail. And you might not get out right away. And none of those bad things happened to me. And that's what I told Amy Murr. That's why I had to write these columns. And that's ultimately why I wrote Profit and Punishment. Because the bad things that happen to poor people in the criminal justice system, particularly people of color, when you look statistically in the various places that this happens across the country, don't happen to people who have my lived experience, don't happen to people who can write a check to get out of the minor things that happen to them. And that's wrong. And the unfortunate thing is, one of the reasons that this happens is because we have allowed legislatures to use the criminal justice system as ATMs. We had police officers in North St. Louis County whose mayors were telling them, you've got to meet your ticket quota. I need more money. The same thing is happening to judges in rural Missouri, where you have presiding commissioners saying, hey, we got to fill that jail. We got to pay for it. We need to go charge some more people to make sure that we can make our budget next month. That's not what the criminal justice system is for. And when we do this, we trample on the civil rights of poor people in particular. And that's what happened to Kendi Kilman in Oklahoma. It's what happened to Brooke Bergen in Missouri. It's what happened to Sasha Darby in South Carolina. And it has devastating consequences. One of the things that happens in some jurisdictions, Sasha Darby is a great example. Sasha was charged with a misdemeanor, ended up owing about $700, paid off some of it. Actually, she owed closer to $1,000, paid off some of it, and then she missed a payment. She has an interaction with a police officer totally unrelated to her previous crime. She just happened to be in a situation where a police officer recognized her, happened to run her name and realized she had a warrant out for her arrest. Very similar circumstance to happen to me. The reason she had a warrant out for her arrest is because she had missed a payment on the $1,000 that she owed the court. So the police officer takes her to court and she appears before the judge, and the judge says, do you have the $700 that you owe me? And Sasha says, no, I don't have that. And so the judge offers her a chance, offers her a choice. This is something that happens in jurisdictions, particularly in the South. It doesn't happen in a lot of places, but you talk about a pay or stay model, which is what people in the criminal justice field refer to it as. The judge says to Sasha, you can either write me a check for $700 or I'm going to send you to jail. And every day you are in jail will count about $75 towards, or $35, $50, whatever it is, towards the bill that you owe me, the judge. And so you, because you're a poor person, now go to jail for 21 days. That's how long Sasha Darby ended up sitting in the Columbia, South Carolina jail. Not because she had committed another crime, but because she owed $700. What a ridiculous dichotomous system that is. If you're wealthy and you commit a crime, you write a check. If you're poor, you go to jail. Sasha's story reminds me of one of the other people I wrote about in Missouri, a gentleman named William Everts. William originally got busted for stealing a computer in Caldwell County in Northwest Missouri from a church. Police found it. They tracked him down. They found it. It was in his trunk, got the computer back, charged him with the misdemeanor theft. He ended up spending a little bit of time in jail because he couldn't afford his bail. Pleads guilty to time served, all of the things that happen in these cases all the time. William ends up becoming homeless and ends up in Kansas City. And every time he would get picked up for something, homeless people get picked up by the police all the time. He'd get picked up for something. He would have this warrant out for his arrest in Caldwell County because he still owed Caldwell County money. So the police would take him back to Caldwell County, and he'd serve some more time in jail. And then the judge would let him out, but he'd get a new bill for the 7 days he spent in jail. And so then his bill for what he owed Caldwell County from the misdemeanor theft charge kept getting higher and higher and higher. By the time I wrote about Mr. Everts, he had been homeless on the streets in Kansas City for several years, and his bill kept getting higher. And this woman who was an advocate for homeless people in Kansas City takes him in, tries to help him, get him cleaned up, trying to help him get directed towards a job. And she writes the judge a letter. And she actually makes an offer, sadly, like what happened to Sasha Darby. But because he was homeless, it was a reasonable offer. It seemed that way for him and for his advocate. And so she writes the judge and says, "Judge, I'll bring William to your jail. This debt hanging over him is stopping him from ever getting out of his homeless situation. But he's got people that care for him in Kansas City. We're going to try to help him out, but we got to get this debt out from under him. Can we bring him to your jail, and you tell us how many days he has to stay in your jail in order to wipe out that debt?" The judge said no. Judge said, "If he comes to the jail, I'm going to charge you more money." So he couldn't wipe out that debt. The good news is, and some of you may know this if you read my columns regularly, the Missouri Supreme Court ultimately ruled that judges can't do that anymore, that it is illegal in the state of Missouri to put a poor person back in jail because they can't afford to pay their jail bill. In the time since that decision, and I write about this in my book, a Supreme Court in Idaho, also a conservative state, has issued a very similar unanimous ruling regarding people there that were going through the same process. Poor people ended up being put in jail because they couldn't afford to pay their fines and fees. There is a growing consensus across the country that the idea that we're using our court system to raise money from poor people to pay for other government services is really inefficient. It violates people's civil rights, and it shouldn't happen. In the last week, the House in New Mexico passed a bill that would allow judges to waive all fines and fees. In the state of New York, there is a bill being put forward called the End Predatory Fines and Fees Act that would get rid of all fines and fees underlying criminal justice cases, so that when people commit crimes and they are punished for their crimes, they are just punished for their crimes, not punished for their poverty. So there's good news. There's good news at the end of my book. There's good news that there is some movement, and it's bipartisan movement across the country to try to change this idea that we're going to use the courts to punish people's poverty. That's one of the things I want you to all take away from this, and hopefully get, if you read Profit and Punishment, that there is progress being made. People are understanding that what's happening in terms of putting poor people in jail because of their poverty is wrong, but it's still happening in jurisdictions all over the country. I just wrote this week about a town in Alabama called Brookside, that is sort of the new Ferguson, small town near Birmingham, in which they basically decided they were going to use their police force to raise money on traffic tickets and minor offenses. And they're pulling people over left and right and getting almost 50% of their city's budget just out of traffic tickets. And that has real effects primarily on people who live in poverty because they can't afford to pay the fines and fees. And then they end up losing their driver's licenses. And then they end up having criminal repercussions because you know what happens if you're a poor person and you lose your driver's license? You're still going to drive to your job. You're still going to try to take care of your family. We need to have a movement across this country that gets the extraction of wealth out of our criminal justice system. And I hope my book adds to that process to some degree. I've been really appreciative so far that the folks who have read it, they really seem to get it. A lot of people that I talk to, they call me or text me or email me, people that I know, and they say, your book really made me angry. And I was like, well, that's good. That's good. That's what I was going for. This is not a happy book, you know, kumbaya, let's all come together. This is a book about devastating injustice that is happening all across our country. And it's very real, and it's happening in Missouri, and it's happening in all of our border states, and it's happening every place where there is a government that has decided that I'm going to try to use poor people to raise money for government services rather than just treat the criminal justice system for its intended purpose of you know, keeping us safe in our communities where we live. So I'm going to stop there, and Lindsay, you take over, and we'll answer some questions here.
Okay, yes. First up, we have a question from Cindy asking, are there any advocacy groups in St. Louis taking up this issue yet?
Yes, there's a couple. So Arch City Defenders, which is a law firm in the city of St. Louis, nonprofit law firm, they're involved in this issue. They filed the debtor's prison lawsuit against the city of Ferguson, against Jennings, against Maplewood, against St. Anne's. They've been very much involved in this process. And they also ended up taking the case of George Ritchie, who the case that I mentioned in the Missouri Supreme Court, in which there were two cases that made their way to the Missouri Supreme Court, George Ritchie and John Wright, in which the court said you can't, judges cannot be threatening poor people with more time in jail because they couldn't afford to pay their board bill. Arch City Defenders ended up filing a civil lawsuit on Mr. Ritchie's behalf to try to get some money for the damage that was done to his life. That lawsuit is making its way through the court system. The ACLU is very involved in this issue nationally and has been somewhat locally, but lots of the ACLU chapters in different states are involved. The ACLU filed a federal civil rights lawsuit in South Carolina on behalf of Sasha Darby, one of the people that I wrote about in the book. That lawsuit is ongoing. There's a national nonprofit called the Civil Rights Corps that, along with a bunch of other attorneys, filed a similar civil rights lawsuit in Oklahoma related to, again, the Kendi Kilman case and other people who were abused by the system in Oklahoma on their behalf. Again, that lawsuit is also making its way through the system. MacArthur Justice Center is involved in lots of different criminal justice reform concepts here in St. Louis, not necessarily as much on the fines and fees end that I'm aware of, but they're another good organization that's involved in criminal justice reform and filing you know, lawsuits on behalf of people that have been wrongly convicted and that sort of thing. Hopefully that answered the question, Lindsay.
Yes, thank you. I have another question asking, where do you get the courage to tackle these type of topics? And also, what day does your column get published in the Post?
So my column runs 4 days a week: Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I've been doing this a long time, and one of the things that that brings me joy is when you write about somebody and something good happens in their lives. It gives you the energy to deal with sometimes the negativity when you're going up against judges or lawmakers or sheriffs or whoever happens to not like what you're writing about any given time. And so when I write about people in poverty and hold up their ability to have the same civil rights that I have, and I see good things happen in their life, it gives me the energy to continue to battle giants occasionally, and particularly because of their courage, because they lift me up. I visited the other day with a woman named LaShawn Casey, who's one of the characters in my book. She's one of the women that I met in Dent County originally and lives now in St. Louis. And she wrote me a couple of letters when I first started writing these columns. And the first letter she wrote me was while she was in the Dent County jail. And it's people like that that really have courage. They're the ones who have the system, the whole weight of the system going after them, who are fighting for justice while they're behind bars. And they inspire me to fight on their behalf.
Sue would like to know, is this practice happening in the northern states and the West Coast as well?
Happens everywhere. In the book, I write about board bills, the pay to stay type bills, specifically in Minnesota. There's a law professor up there that's filed a couple of lawsuits trying to battle that practice, but it still happens. They're still charging for jail in Minnesota, and they're still sometimes putting poor people in jail because they can't afford to pay those bills. And fines and fees are a problem everywhere. They are a problem in Arizona and California and Oregon. They're just a problem everywhere. There are some jurisdictions on a limited individual cases that are trying to improve the process. One of the places where we're starting to see the most progress nationally is this idea that we have to stop suspending people's driver's licenses because they can't afford to pay their fines and fees. That still happens in Missouri, but Illinois last year, might be 2 years ago now, COVID messes with my brain in terms of history, but Illinois is one of more than a dozen states in the last 2 or 3 years that have repealed their statutes that allow the Department of Revenue to automatically suspend driver's licenses for people who fall behind on their fines and fees. And think about that. The government is trying to collect money from you because you got a you got a ticket and you owe money. In order to spur you to pay them, they're going to suspend your driver's license. Well, now you can't get to work. How are you going to get to work to get the money that you need to pay the government the services? And so it's a backwards concept, and lawmakers are starting to realize that doesn't make any sense. And they're also starting to realize that the fines and fees are out of control and that they have nothing to do with trying to make people better drivers or safer in their community. So there is some really good progress being made in that regard. Lots of states are changing those laws so people can keep their driver's licenses if they fall behind in fines and fees. They're still stuck with their fines and fees. They still have all sorts of potential civil repercussions, but states are starting to realize slowly, I think, that having criminal repercussions because you can't afford to pay fines or fees is unjust and doesn't do anything to keep us safe as a community.
All right, Leslie would like to know, are parents of minors in the juvenile justice system also required to pay similar fees and fines or board bills?
Yes, and this is an area I have not actually done any reporting on, but one of the There's a professor at Cal Berkeley named Jeff Selbin, who I talk to every once in a while, who's a big advocate for getting rid of fines and fees. And this is his particular area of research. And he's been encouraging me to get into this area. I have not done much reporting on it yet, but there is a real problem, as I understand it, with these juvenile fines and fees too. And they tend to affect, obviously, the parents and the families. And so then they again, it's a lot like this school to prison pipeline. I mean, it starts so early, and now you're causing these families to have more issues related to their poverty. That's not doing much to help a juvenile have the support around them in case they had been charged with something, and you know, you're trying to keep them out of the criminal justice system. So I am a big advocate for just getting rid of pretty much all fines and fees related to the criminal justice system, with the possible exception of restitution in a case of theft, particularly if you stole somebody's whatever, and particularly for wealthy people, you know, obviously somebody who embezzles, we ought to require them to pay that money back, that sort of thing. But that's not a fine and fee. That's restitution. Any fines and fees that are put on the system that causes a poor person to have more criminal, potential for criminal harm within the system, simply because they're poor and they can't afford to pay it, get rid of all those. Doesn't do anything to help our system. And what it's going to require is state legislatures then to have to answer some tough questions. So the Missouri legislature is going to have to deal with this year. I wrote a column about this a couple of weeks ago. One of the things, I've got a whole chapter in the book on this $3 fee that we have in Missouri for the state sheriff's retirement fund. The sheriffs, particularly the rural sheriffs, a long time ago decided, hey, you know what, we're not being paid enough and we need some extra money for our retirement. So they went to the legislature, and the legislature said, well, we agree with you. We'd love for you to have money, but we're not going to raise taxes. We're not going to put it in the general revenue fund. But what if we charge $3 on every court case in the state? And keep in mind, this was primarily for rural sheriffs. Well, when you ask the legislature to add a $3 fee, what you're really asking the legislature for is charge people in Kansas City and St. Louis a special tax to pay for whatever it is that I need, because that's where the bulk of the court cases are. So they passed this $3 fee. Lots of judges realized that's unconstitutional. You can't be charging poor people this extra $3 fee to pay for some rural sheriff's retirement in Pike County, even though it has nothing to do with his particular case. Well, a group of Kansas City attorneys finally filed a lawsuit. Last year, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that $3 fee was unconstitutional. Thankfully, they made that ruling right before my book went to print, so I was able to include it in the book. And now the sheriffs, realizing that they've lost their funding source, are back to the legislature saying, well, where are we going to get our money? So their proposal before the legislature right now is to charge poor people $50 on eviction cases. And so they're back with the same sort of scheme. There's going to be lots of eviction cases in the next couple of years because we've been putting them on hold during the pandemic. Let's go get some money out of that. And again, you know, the challenge for legislatures is going to be, okay, look, we want to fund our sheriffs, but we're not going to use the court system. At least I hope they don't use the court system to raise that money. You either compete for the general revenue along with school children and road contractors and everybody else, or you find another revenue source. But charging poor people money and leaving them the potential of criminal consequences if they can't pay is just truly unjust and unconstitutional, and that's what we have to stop.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to kind of roll that into our next question from Diane, asking what can we as individuals do? I mean, is a lot of this with, dependent on raising taxes, or do you see another way to get around this sort of misuse of or mistreatment of our citizens?
Well, I think we have to just understand that we put way too many people in jail in this country. I mean, the United States continues to lead the world, and it's not even close, in mass incarceration. And if that made sense, we'd be the safest country in the world. But we're not. We have homicide problems, we have gun problems. We also lead the world in gun sales, and that hasn't made us the safest country in the world either. I think both of those things, frankly, are related, but that's another issue for another book. But I think part of the thing that we have to understand is we need to challenge ourselves. I ask a question at the end of the book that I hope everybody who reads the book asks themselves: are your civil rights worth more than the civil rights of the poor people that you know? Whether or not they've been accused of a crime, or whether or not they have various flaws or not. I think that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. And if we all start advocating for people's civil rights to be protected throughout the entire system, then we start putting fewer people in jail, and we start emptying our jails. And then it's not necessarily a question of raising more taxes, because we spend a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to have full jails. And if we start transitioning to a system where we are not packing our jails all the time, particularly municipal and county jails, because those are the jails that then lead to our crowded state prisons and federal prisons. If we start asking our local lawmakers, our mayors, our police chiefs, our county sheriffs, our judges, say, you know what, let's stop putting people in jail all the time. Let's not put every single person, particularly the people that are being held pre-trial before they're convicted. And it's challenging with some charges. I write about and advocate for people that are sometimes charged with offenses that are in some cases deemed violent, in which I still argue that we don't need to hold people in jail pre-trial. Why? Because if I get charged with the same offense and I can afford a good attorney and I can afford bail, I'm not going to be held pre-trial. So why does the poor Black person in St. Louis County or St. Louis City get held pre-trial, but not the wealthy white guy who lives in Wildwood? That's not how the system, at least in theory, at least in how we write it in the Constitution, is supposed to work. But that's how the system works in practice. And we have to start breaking through that mold. And just I constantly go back to that concept of mass incarceration. It can't make sense that all the rest of the first world countries out there that are our allies, that they've all figured it out, and they don't have to put such a high percentage of their populations in jail, and we do. There can't be some genetic failure in the United States that only Americans are the most violent people in the world who have to be incarcerated at such high rates. So to me, I think that's a huge part of the underlying problem. And one of the reasons that our incarceration is so high is because we keep putting people in jail because they're poor. And we exacerbate their poverty, and then some of them do commit criminal offenses. Brooke Bergen, during the time that I was writing this book, was in state prison. She was in state prison for driving on a suspended license. Think about that. Who puts somebody in prison for driving on a suspended license? What danger is she to society? She's not, but she ticked the judge off because she's somebody who ended up before that judge enough times that that judge just said, screw it, I'm sending you to prison. Well, why was she before that judge all the time? She was before that judge all the time because the judge kept trying to collect money out of her when she stole an $8 tube of mascara. And one thing leads to another and leads to another. And it's unjust, and it doesn't do anything to improve people's lives, and it doesn't do anything to help ingratiate people back into a community when they get out of jail or prison, and it doesn't do anything to ultimately improve our public safety.
Whew, yeah. Diane would like to know, do you have any other books? Now, this is your first book, correct?
This is my first book.
So do you have plans for any upcoming books, or have you learned a lot from this process?
So I did learn a lot from the process, and I do want to write another book. I wasn't very good at it when I started. Writing a book is a lot different than writing a column. And I had a really good editor at St. Martin's, Pranoy Sarkar, who's now at Little Brown. He ended up getting a new job after he edited my book. But I learned a lot about it, and I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed the challenge of writing a book. I enjoyed that the opportunity to tell a narrative in a meaningful, lasting way. I hope a meaningful, lasting way. And I do intend to try to pitch another book project, hopefully soon, probably in the same sort of criminal justice realm. It's the area that's attracted a lot of my attention lately, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for us to make a more just system. So definitely looking into that, and hopefully we'll write another book.
Awesome. Can't wait to read it. Profit and Punishment is such a good read. I read it a few weeks ago, and oof, yeah, definitely gets your blood boiling. I think it's about time to wrap up. And ML Smith made a very great, wrote a very great comment in the chat that I think a lot of us will support here. As an advocate that works for reforms in the criminal legal system, I've encountered so much inequity and targeting of marginalized communities. These issues are affecting so many people. Thank you for speaking out. And yes, thank you so much, Tony, for writing this book, bringing it to so many more people's attention. And hopefully we can start turning this backward system back around. So
thank you so much. I appreciate the great crowd tonight, and I'll be heading out to Subterranean in the next couple days to sign a bunch of books, and look forward to you all reading it. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you. And again, in the chat, if you haven't checked, everyone, you can go ahead and order a copy of Profit and Punishment from Subterranean Books if you want to go ahead and get that signed. So thanks again, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.